wonderful color printouts with this group. So I'm going to distract you for a moment. I'm going to talk a little more substantively in a few minutes, but first thing I wanted to do, I'm going to thank the panel a number of times. Some of them will be introduced, but it was an amazing, amazing group. I'm also, first off, here to introduce the fellow at the MTA who worked with the panel and arranged for them to get access for information and to do the tours and to actually wrangle the data. And that's Jeremy Fagelson. Jeremy is somebody, thank you. People who worked on this effort know what Jeremy did. Jeremy was somebody, we were contemporaries in the Koch administration many moons ago. I was working on transit, Jeremy on social services. And in his career as a lawyer before he retired from that short stint, Jeremy was also the chairman of the Partnership for the Homeless. He's been active in social services, and we were just very lucky to have him come aboard the MTA as a special counsel to help us work on issues of how do we deal with the intersection of law and enforcement and technology, which was his background as a lawyer, and most important, social services and social justice issues. So let me thank Jeremy and introduce him to introduce what you're going to hear about on this report from the panel. Jeremy.
Thanks, Jano. It has been a huge privilege to support this panel. These are 16 New York leaders who just love the city, love the region, love the transit system. And fun fact, actually bonded at the first meeting by going around the table and everybody trading stories about what buses and subways and trains they ride in their daily lives. After they did that, they did the work. This has been the hardest working Blue Ribbon panel in show business. They got out and about. They were at the Verrazano Bridge, the 86th and Lex subway, at the bus stop at Hunts Point Avenue and Southern Boulevard. They made it out on Metro North to White Plains, Grand Central, Jamaica, LIRR, Penn Station. They did the work, they did the data, they talked with experts, they engaged with riders directly, and they made sure that we talked a lot with other transit systems too, so we could bring best practices to them for their consideration. And the result, I think you'll see, is that this is not your grandfather's approach to fare evasion. It's fresh, it's different, it's comprehensive. It's an approach that for the first time says we're going to pay as much attention to the driver of the Mercedes with the fake plate as we are to the person who's walking through the subway exit gate or the commuter rail rider who is hiding from the conductor. It is also an approach that says for the first time we're really going to go at root causes. We're going to look at technology, design, education, and equity, and we're going to also find smarter and fairer ways to police the problem, but we're not going to put police first. So I'm going to turn it over in a second to members of the panel here. So thanks to Lisa Daglian, Matt Fishbein, Michael Hardy, and to Judge Michael Sonberg. I also need to thank our friends at the Partnership for New York City. Merrill Pond and Brooke Jackson from the Partnership were the co-staff directors of this project with me, and they've been amazing partners. And we want to thank Kathy Wild for putting the Partnership's resources at the panel's disposal. And now to our co-chairs, the stars of the show. Roger Maldonado is a senior partner at a leading law firm here in the city. He is also the former president of the New York City Bar Association. Rose Pierre-Louis has had a distinguished career in public service in New York City, and she is currently the leader of the NYU McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research. Roger and Rose, thank you so much for your service, and please take it away.
Thank you, Jeremy. Chairman Lieber, Jeremy Fagelson, and members of the public. I'm honored to be here today with co-chair Roger Maldonado and members of our Blue Ribbon panel for this important announcement. First, let me begin by outlining our charge as a panel. We were tasked with taking a fresh and comprehensive look at fare evasion across the MTA, not just subways and buses, but also examining the problem on commuter rail, bridges, and tunnels. Thereafter, we identified solutions and set forth a series of recommendations that we are sharing with New Yorkers this afternoon. As Jeremy said, the Blue Ribbon Panel is made up of 16 civic-minded New Yorkers from across sectors in business, law, social justice, and criminal justice. We all care deeply about the transit system and the future of the mass transit system. And we also are MTA customers. Over the past year, we have done our homework. We have performed 9 site visits of subway, bus, commuter rail, and bridge and tunnel facilities, and have held 6 panel-wide meetings. We have found that fare evasion is at crisis levels across the transit system, and the problem is much bigger than everyone thinks. Notably, since the pandemic, fare evasion has increased particularly and significantly on both subways and buses. Turning the tide on these sobering numbers is mission critical, and we firmly believe that action must be taken now before the impact is irreversible. Through the panel's work, we have found that the MTA is uniquely reliant upon fare and toll revenues to support its operations. To put it plainly, without fares and tolls, the MTA could not provide anywhere near the quality of mass transit service that New York demands. At a time when customers are coming back to mass transit, in post-pandemic record numbers, customers feel foolish and frustrated when they see rampant fare evasion throughout the system. As you know, mass transit is a precious public space. In many ways, it is New York's public square, and evasion poses a serious threat to order and decency in our subways and buses. And no customer should feel foolish about paying their fare while others don't. In developing a framework for solutions, the panel was very clear that fare evasion enforcement should not be a means of criminalizing poverty. For example, New York City has led the way with Fair Fares, which is a life-changing program that gives eligible New Yorkers a 50% discount on subway and most bus fares. Thus far, nearly 300,000 New Yorkers have enrolled, and this report calls for a doubling of the eligibility threshold. In sum, we were called upon to do some very big thinking and to come up with some very important solutions. And now I will turn things over to Co-Chair Roger Maldonado, who will outline some of our recommendations. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. When I was first asked to consider joining the panel, I thought that the main issue that the panel would be dealing with is how do you stop teenagers from jumping turnstiles without sending them to Rikers Island? As I learned very quickly through service on the panel, different people evade for different reasons. You have the opportunistic evader, which Jeremy described as the person who's about ready to pay for the fare on the subway, sees the emergency gate fly open, 4 or 5 persons precede him or her through the gate and says, why not? And also goes through without paying. You have the frustrated evader, someone who had cash in hand to pay at the vending machine the fare, but then sees that the vending machine has been completely disabled and has no choice, if he or she's going to make the train, but to either jump the turnstile or pay someone who's conveniently holding open the gate for a price. And then you have the persons that Rose was describing, those who suffer financial hardships, who each time they're going to get on a subway or a bus have to make a choice between can I afford to do this, or do I have to save this money for some other emergent need? And then, unfortunately, you have the determined evaders, those who, no matter what happens, they're going to look for ways to not have to pay the fare. And this is part of the solution, which I'll get to soon. And the other thing that the panel members learned quickly is it's not, as Rose described, it's not just the subways. You have evaders on the buses. You know, several panel members and I went to the Staten Island bus terminal and watched persons walk right by a uniformed MTA Eagle person, then walk right past the fare box and keep going. And then were surprised when they were asked to step off the bus because they hadn't paid the fare. I ride Metro North every day, and I've heard several persons complain about the fact that they activated their ticket, and for whatever reason, the conductor didn't come by to take a swipe on it. And it's the fact that they paid for a ride didn't seem to matter. And then you have the tolls and bridges, where you have James Bond-like devices that flip license plates and are marketed on well-known internet sites for sale. So in order to address all of these types of evasion in these different modes, the panel came up with this report. It includes over 70 recommendations, which are subdivided into 4 main groups, what we call the 4 E's. Education. Here it is enormously important for us to be able to educate not just children, but society in general, not just in New York City, but in the tri-state area, that in order to operate this system that drives the economy of New York City, you need a working transit system, and for that you have to pay the fare. We also need to convey the fact that it's a civic duty. Sure, you can probably get away with not paying the fare, but you should be trying to do so. This is your way of helping support your community. Environment, and that's this. These fare gates are designed to make it much, much harder for persons to evade paying the fare coming in. Most importantly, what they do is obviate the need for the emergency gates that are the main source, believe it or not. It's not the turnstile jumping, it's going through those emergency gates without paying. That's the main problem. And fortunately, this was in the works without regard to our panel's work. The MTA wanted to do this, in fact, has started doing this, because it makes the entrance and use of the system more accessible and just more inviting. You know, you've all seen those corkscrew devices that sometimes you have to get through. People purposely evade going through them and instead choose the emergency gates precisely because they're so uninviting. This is the wave of the future. Equity. You heard Rose describe the Fair Fares program. The goal here is to enable persons who really cannot afford to pay the full price to be able to go to work, to be able to go see a sick loved one, to be able, God forbid, to enjoy one of our cultural institutions spread out all over the city without having to worry about, can I afford to do this? We are, for the reasons recommended in the report, we're also considering ways, and this would require legislation, to enable the enforcement agency, the civil enforcement agency, to not charge someone the full fine for the first offense and take into consideration the person's economic means. And with respect to enforcement, key issue is it should be, to the extent absolutely possible, civil. We don't want the police enforcing fare evasion on the buses, for example. And across the board, be it buses, subways, etc., there should be a warning. And it should be a documented warning, one where the person is told, I'm letting you off this time, but the next time there will be consequences. And there should be a record of it so that there is not any sort of slipping into, well, I'm going to let this little old grandmother go by, but I'm not going to let this very strong-looking young person go by. The enforcement should also be done in cooperation with the community. One of our recommendations is to look for ways to involve the community in advance notice of enforcement in particular locations, so that the word gets out about fair fares, so that if you can't afford, please enroll in fair fares. The word gets out, there's going to be enforcement. We know that you don't always evade, don't do it now, and perhaps get into the habit of not doing it at all. And the goal also is to use data to focus on those areas where there is a particular amount of evasion. And it's important that that data be used not to target just poor communities, but places like Grand Central, where the rate of evasion may not be the same in terms of percentages, but in raw numbers it outstrips many of the other communities. We need to target evasion all across the board. We have the fortune of having all 5 district attorneys in New York City agreeing that going forward, and they probably will say we've been doing this all along, there will be prosecution of evaders who are either committing serious crimes or otherwise posing dangers to the other users of subways, buses, and the transit system. And they will prosecute those evaders, such as the person who vandalized the machines to be able to purchase the fares in the first place, and who then profit from that vandalization. And the panel encourages all of the district attorneys to consider prosecuting the persistent evader, the person who just refuses to pay a fare ever when circumstances so warrant. This has been a massive undertaking, and it was not undertaken just by the panel, and it was not undertaken just in coordination with the MTA, but with a series of agencies within New York City and outside, and more importantly with stakeholders who use the system on a daily basis and who had much input, which I credit Jeremy and the MTA for both listening to and trying to reconcile, because the input did not always come from the same direction. As Rose said, we are at a critical moment. If we do not, through education and the other enforcement mechanisms that we've described in this report, we run the risk of having the culture of fare evasion becoming permanently embedded in our community, which would, as described both in the report and by Rose and others, would wreak economic havoc on the MTA. Perhaps just as importantly, would really be a lasting damage to the moral fabric of our society. So this report is an important first next step to try to tackle this very, very difficult problem. With that, I leave you to Chairman and CEO of the MTA, Jan Oliva.
Thank you. Okay. I have to tell you, I'm incredibly moved by the civic spirit of this group, and who comes from all different roles and communities in the city, and who really work together. I mean, every one of them went out. You heard something about these site visits they made to bridges, to subway stations, to transit locations in the far-flung boroughs. So I just got to say again, both to the co-chairs, but to everybody who's done this, thank you. Thank you for being so passionate about New York and what the transit system means to us, and giving us ideas, which we're now going to focus in on intensely, about how to make it better. You know, fare evasion, and before I go further, I have to also acknowledge someone who hasn't been acknowledged, the General Counsel of the MTA, Paige Graves, who also has played a big... We're talking about legal issues in the MTA. We're talking to Paige Graves. Thank you, Paige. Look, fare evasion, toll evasion, and the toll evasion is a big, big thing. People have not focused on that enough, and we're starting to see the world waking up to the fact that people are stealing from the rest of us by playing games with their license plates. And in the last 6 months, we have impounded dozens and dozens of super luxury automobiles owned by people who owe New Yorkers in excess of $50,000 or $100,000. And we're not going to stop doing that because that is an outrage to ride around in a Bugatti and a Mercedes and stiff New Yorkers who are just trying to get to school or to work on the transit system. So it's a complicated issue. It raises questions about economics and community and our social cohesion. It raises questions about enforcement, but also about equality and affordability, the things that the MTA is intensely focused on making better in New York. And we haven't gotten through reviewing all the details in this report, but broadly speaking, what I love about it is the innovative ideas, that they're attacking the problem from all directions and giving us a lot of ideas to work with. So I'm proud to receive the recommendations. Making these recommendations a reality is going to be a team effort. We will not be able to do it alone. There's no surprise. It's not a coincidence that we put Schools Chancellor David Banks on this panel. He's not here today, but the Schools Chancellor was on the panel. He allowed us to spend time with focus groups of young people, of high school students, talking about the pattern of fare evasion and how do we deal with it among our young people. We need the education community, we need community groups, we need, of course, courts and district attorneys and NYPD, but we need all of the stakeholders to participate if we're going to have an impact. But this is an issue that requires attention. $700 million per year now. $700 million. It was $500 million when I started this, but our most recent estimates are it's a $700 million a year problem. And we can't put at risk the ability of working class and middle class New Yorkers to get where they need to go. That is money that could be used to provide more service, more frequent service, more reliable service. It could be used to invest in infrastructure. Those are things that deliver affordability and equity and opportunity, and I'm not going to stand by while they're being sacrificed to selfishness. Listen, I've made a point in my time at the MTA to take on big issues. It's not a secret. My idea of what you do when you get these jobs in government is to do things now. There's always going to be a reason not to attack a problem. There's always going to be some new political or challenge or an economic downturn or a hurricane or something that distracts us. If it's a serious issue, we got to attack it now, and that's what we're doing at the MTA. Dealing with fare evasion is very much on that list, and I got to say one more time, I'm so grateful to the panel for all of these interesting, innovative ideas. So with that, we'll bring our program to a close, and we enter Mondo Minton.
Mr. Chairman, since recommendations of the panel is to implement higher security fare payment gates, and you have some of those models behind you, how soon could you realistically outfit 472 stations with units like this? And if you decided to do that, how much would it cost? Okay, so obviously that kind of a move at that scale is going to take a while. But right now what we're doing is we're implementing the new wide aisle gates, which are one of the models that are being shown here, which do have benefits. It's in lieu of, in many stations, we're installing them in lieu of, instead of those emergency exit doors that have become the superhighway of fare evasion. So that's an important step. We're going to put out a request for information to look at different models of gates. We're starting to study the ones you see behind us. But in the meantime, we're already taking action by having gate guards at in excess of 30 stations where we saw the most severe fare evasion through that exit gate, through that emergency exit door. We've already got gate guards, and it's showing that we're actually saving money by paying people to discourage folks from opening those gates. We're actually saving money.
Well, in individuals, we're analyzing the pattern of fare evasion at individual stations. So we're taking action now. Obviously, installation of a whole new generation of turnstiles of fare arrays is going to take a while. But you got to get, if anything's serious, you got to get started, and we are starting right now to move that forward. I don't know it's a fair question, as I'm known to say. I don't know the answer to that, but listen, it's all of us who live in this system know that there are a lot of people. I think you said it, Roger. A lot of people who we literally see with their Omni open, heading towards a turnstile, and they see the exit gate open, and they redirect and go through it. There are a lot of opportunistic fare evaders who are one category that Roger Maldonado talked about. So we think that there's opportunistic fare evasion. There's a lot of fare evasions in communities where we know people have the capacity to pay, and that the physical infrastructure is part of the problem. So we're starting to address that. One thing I didn't mention is, as of now, we are going to be implementing delays on certain of those exit doors. That is to say, when you push the push bar to try to go out and open that gate, there's going to be a delay of 30 seconds plus. We're starting to do this. It has to do with the fire code. We're in negotiations with the code authorities of the state of New York. That is one way to make sure that people don't just routinely use it as an exit, and when they open it, lots of people come in. That is one strategy that we're starting to implement on a limited scale right now. But we'll have to see, Ben, but there is evidence that suggests that there are people who can be deterred.
When was the last time that MTA redesigned its gates? And secondly, you mentioned in the report precision policing, using new data sources and technology tools to help focus resources on fare evaders who pose serious threats to public safety. Specifically, what technology tools are you referring to, and how will those tools evaluate whether a fare evader is posing a serious threat?
I will have to get back to you on the question of how old the current fare array design is. I don't know the answer. That's a good question. I grew up in there, still the wood turnstiles. You see them some places in the system. But I'm going to let Rose and Roger answer the question of the policing strategy.
One aspect of the targeted policing strategy is what I mentioned about involving the community and using data to determine where to focus. The idea is to have, in essence, a pilot of an evasion-free station. And in order to have that pilot work the way it should, before you have, and these would be stations where you have cameras that will determine how evasion takes place. And before having that pilot begin, you then go out to the community. You try and involve the community in having people sign up for fair fares, having people understand that to the extent that you pay your fare here in this station, you make it easier for the MTA to continue to provide services as needed in this station. What you don't want to do is to have, because of fare evasion, a cutback in services, and have that part of the community effort in the the precision policing. But the other aspect of it is using cameras to be able to monitor what's going on within the station.
I can hold it. I'm a grown-up.
Rose, I want to get you in.
Jano, are you going to talk to City Hall officials and NYPD's Michael Kemper and say, please back off on, because they've been doing a lot of summonses, much more into the Adams administration than de Blasio. Are you going to tell them to back off now that you have this report?
No, I mean, to the contrary, I mean, I think this is, the Transit Bureau under Michael Kemper is actually very forward-thinking and a really great partner for us. So we're very much working together in partnership. I do want them to evaluate the recommendations, as I will, of the panel and see how that might affect their strategy and their deployment and how they instruct officers. So that discussion is underway. It's just begun, and we're gonna keep working with the NYPD. They are part of this, the solution in the long run. Although, as the panel said, they are recommending an approach that has a lot of different components in addition to NYPD enforcement. At this point, I think what we need to do is to give the NYPD an opportunity to review the report, and then we'll have further dialogue on how they're going to implement some of these ideas and how we're going to work together.
Hi, Jenna. A couple of related questions. First, regarding the commuter rail, this makes mention of potentially adding physical fare control at some heavily trafficked stations. What might that look like? Where would be what are some of the candidates for those stations? And secondly, and I imagine maybe my first question is in part an answer to this, how does the MTA intend to address the reality that a lot of the fare evasion on the commuter railroads, particularly Long Island Railroad, is due to the fact that trains are so crowded that conductors are unable to get through them to collect tickets?
So first of all, I got to say, fact check, trains are much less crowded than they were before COVID. So I don't know that I buy into the idea that the trains are too crowded to collect the fare. But we are in a world where people are using online, ticketing. The whole issue of fare activation and education about when they have to fare activate is an issue, and we're going to keep doing that. I'm going to let the chairs answer any further questions about how gates or physical barriers might work on the.
So in terms of the commuter rails, what we recommend in the report is that we'll need to do some assessments to see where the appropriate areas would be to install those kinds of gates as you described. Again, we're just releasing the report and the recommendations. Now will be the time for the MTA and other partners in government to be able to look at opportunities for the immediate term, medium term, and long term in terms of implementation.
Yeah, so if you look at the most recent numbers for summonses and arrests in the subway, vastly disproportionately people of color. Is that acceptable to the MTA? And what is the MTA doing to address that? And secondly, better service. Is offering better service on the system something that the panel considered so that more riders see value in the system itself? They're more willing to pay for the fare?
Well, first of all, I'd just say we don't need fare evasion as a motivation to offer first-class service, and we're at the best subway performance in 10 years. Long Island Railroad last year 96%, Metro North 97% on-time performance. There's always a lot of ways we can and should get better. We're working at it, particularly on buses and getting rid of the things that block bus speeds. But service is what we do, and we're passionate about that. I don't need fare evasion motivation to do that. So on the other question, I'm going to let the panel members answer.
Go ahead, I can jump in after you.
One of the reasons we are recommending an increase in eligibility for fair fares is to address that exact issue. There is a direct correlation between race and poverty in New York City as there is across the nation. And to the extent that you can make more persons, be of color or whatever their race, able to use the system and afford it, it's going to result in fewer summonses, fewer arrests of persons of color. The police, we had on our panel, we have our panel that is about to end as of today, the chair of the Community Service Society, who was enormously focused on that exact point, which is why Rose in her opening comments made clear one of the things that cannot happen, certainly not as a result of this report and cannot be tolerated going forward, is the criminalization of fare evasion, and in particular focusing on persons who can't afford it and who are from communities that tend to be the targets of other types of discrimination. That is not what this report is about.
Hey everyone, is there something
buses is so much higher? Is it folks swiping in on the subway and then not swiping in when they get on the bus for the last leg of their trip home? What percentage of the fare meeting is that?
You guys want to take?
So I think the percentage, Jeremy, is 37%. 37% on the buses, and what you see is sometimes for the bus drivers, they have been told for anyone who's evading not to interfere or interject. So what you have is also people coming through the front door, but they're also coming through the back door. And I do think during the period of COVID, obviously New Yorkers were told to come through the back of the bus for safety protocols. One of the things that we recommend in the report is to really begin to put out clear messaging that you have to pay on the bus, and the expansion of the Eagle teams and having more special investigators throughout the boroughs doing enforcement in all neighborhoods throughout New York City is one way that we'll be able to tackle that.
Maybe if I could just sharpen the question a little
Sure.
bit. What percentage of that 37% paid $275 at some other point in their journey? Is it 0%?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll
I
have
think
to get back to you on that one.
The answer is, I don't know that we're able to answer that right offhand. It is a fair question, but there's no question that we've seen this huge rise since COVID, since we asked people, don't get on the front of the bus, get on the back of the bus, don't pay, and that we're trying to reverse course and get people to understand that. The Eagle teams that Rose just talked about are unarmed civil fare enforcement personnel. And one of the things that was actually in the governor's budget is some money to grow that force and start to do a little bit more of what the panel has been talking about in terms of civil fare enforcement in the bus environment.
My question is there a place in the world, a city where you are impressed with the way they're doing this, that you feel you can learn from? And the second part of the question is, what about the overall limitation? When you look at all this, what is the number one limitation for you and the system?
I'll let you guys answer because you're
So actually, these fare arrays who are here exist in various parts of the world, and we were actually talking to the representatives who are here about where they exist and what they've learned from it. And that learning process has resulted in what can be done now, and more importantly, what can be done in the not too distant future through these arrays, such as being able to distinguish between two people walking back to back, which the arrays will stop, versus someone in a wheelchair where they will be allowed, in fact, given more time. That currently exists in different parts of the world. I can tell you that what the panel looked at was worldwide and nationwide what's being done. And part of our recommendations includes things that have been tried in different parts of the world. But we are not aware of any place that has the type of environment that New York City, well, there is no place that has the type of environment that New York City has, but it is, we are not aware of some place that's got it perfectly right. We are learning together with the rest of the world, and we expect that the MTA will be sharing this knowledge with the rest of the world.
Last question, Ben Brock.
Hey, Jano. Two questions. First, how do you actually measure something like this? An issue that's incredibly widely dispersed, happening over a long time. How can you actually be so sure about this $690 million number?
All I would say is there's a methodology, a sampling methodology that's been used pretty consistently. So you can say it's good, bad, or medium, but it's been pretty consistent. So what it's indicating to us is that fare evasion has soared. The methodology has been looked at by a lot of different folks. We're adapting it also to the fact that we have ability in some places to actually use cameras to chart the rate of fare evasion. That in effect it's a computer system that can tell you how much fare evasion is going on using cameras. So we're updating our methodology, but the methodology of sampling has been pretty consistent going back a couple of years, and people have talked about it and analyzed it.
Is this thing on? Okay. Is this? Is the selection of the vendor, is this going to be subject to a competitive procurement, or is there going to be like a little bit of everything?
You're going to get spanked again. Are you really suggesting we might do a multi-billion-dollar procurement without competition? I don't think you would suggest that. Of course it's going to be, if we do it, it will be competitive, highly competitive, and we're starting with getting into discussions with all of these companies that are already doing it elsewhere. Nolan's trying to get a second bite of the apple. Okay, but one thing that I was asked to let you guys know is yesterday, we're talking about one of the challenges that our system faces, and there are lots. But the good news about ridership continues, because yesterday, the Long Island Railroad and Metro North both had record days. Long Island Railroad with 227,000 customers, Metro North with 207,000 customers. This is like I think out of the last 8 weeks, we've had 7 record weeks, and literally almost every week we have a record on each railroad. We're really on the move on ridership, and it's true in the subways, buses, and commuter railroads. I'll let Mr. Minton deal with the second bite of the apple question.